think it was the spring of 21 when I received a phone call from a colleague of mine, and she told me that a good friend of hers works for a trucking company in Texas, and they were looking to start a podcast, and she was wondering if I was interested.
As you know, the radio kind of got more and more obsolete, and we started to see more podcasts popping up. I thought, why don't we do a podcast? Let's bring out the faces, the people, the voices of all people that are part of Stevens.
So we set up a meeting, and I met Angela Horowitz for the first time and learned a little bit about Stevens Transport. Throughout the interview, Angela learned about my history in radio as a broadcaster, as a morning show host, as a program director and music director. And she had the idea of having me interviewing everybody. We had a lot of downloads, a lot of engagement with our listeners, so we decided to do a season 2.
We started out with one episode a month, and people wanted more, so we went to a bi-monthly, and now we're weekly. We come on every single week.
What we try to do with the Stevens Transport Roadside Radio Podcast is educate our drivers on what's happening in the industry, what's happening here at Stevens Transport, but also try to entertain them a little as well with some personality thrown in.
There's more information than we could ever give you. There's more stories than we could ever tell you in a 30-minute podcast. So the content is it's unlimited.
We would like to encourage everybody who is thinking about starting a career in transportation, thinking about coming over to Stevens Transport, or are already a Stevens Transport driver or employee, to follow the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We're on every single podcast platform there is, so whatever platform you enjoy listening to your podcast, just hit follow or subscribe. And that way, every single week when we release a new episode, it's sitting right there waiting for you. And then we would like to take it a step further and engage with our audience and put our listeners on the podcast. So we have ways for you to get in touch with us, get in touch with me personally, so that we can interview you to become a part of the Stevens Transport Roadside Radio Podcast.